Well, it's been more than 6 months since I've uploaded a video, and some of you know that Elaine and I were planning on retiring and moving during that time, and we did. We uh, we just didn't quite end up where we thought we were going to be, even just 6 months ago. Um, we had plans, yeah, compromises. Sometimes you have to make adjustments to deal with everything in your wants and needs list. And so, yeah, this is where we are. And I guess I'll explain how we got here and what our near-term plans for the future actually are. The plan was to retire at the end of 2022 and then in late spring of 2023 move to Portugal. During a trip in 2017, we found that we really liked Porto and the north of Portugal the best. And so in 2022, we returned to Portugal, this time focusing only on the northern part of the country. We rented short-term apartments with kitchens so we could purchase food at the local markets and make it ourselves like we would if we were living locally, rather than be tourists. But the main focus of this trip was to find a place to board two of our horses and places where we could easily get to and ride our two horses. Unfortunately, boarding horses in Portugal is different than boarding them in the States. The horses are pretty much confined to a small stall all day, every day, unless you take them out. So we identified 3 stables that actually had the type of boarding we were accustomed to. One was north of Porto near Vila do Conde. One was just west of Braga, and the other was way over in the mountains to the north. The problem was finding places to ride. The stables near Vila do Conde and Braga had very limited trails, so there would be a lot of repetition and not much miles. The place in the mountains had lots of trails, lots of different trails going over different variety of terrain. That would have worked, but it was incredibly remote and isolated, and the stables only had horses go out in the summertime. In the winter, it was like most other stables, and the horses were shut in. For a living, we stayed in all 3 cities. Campo do Gerês at the north was small and rustic and remote. Vila do Conde was right on the ocean, had metro access to Porto, but was, again, kind of small. And, well, to be honest, our heart was with Porto. That's where we really fell in love. That's the city we envisioned living in. And the problem became how to get to the horses and how to get the horses to trail. From Porto to get to our favorite stable would be almost a 45-minute drive. From the stables, it's more than an hour to get to any sort of riding trails. And most of that driving is on very narrow, very twisty roads. We would also need a special driver's license, which requires a special driver's test, in order to haul horses in a trailer. And of course, all of the tests are only in Portuguese. We could rent a horse van, which didn't require a special license, and use that to drive from the stables to the trails up in the mountains. But now it's become complicated, and this is something we're going to want to do every week. It became apparent that the move to Portugal at this time would not be practical. So now what? Literally 5 years of research, planning, and dreams had just been swept aside in a moment, and we had no future plans in place. All that I knew is that we needed to move. I was incredibly unhappy in Central Oregon, and we needed to find a new destination, a new place to live. How are we going to do that when the place that really seemed like was the most ideal for us was shot down because of one aspect? It was an important aspect, but still, just one thing shot down the whole enterprise. My strategy is, when in doubt, make a list. Elaine and I wrote our needs and wants onto Post-it notes and then organized them by priority. I then used this to identify locations that met all of the requirements and as many of the wants as possible. For international locations, our options were limited because of the need for a permanent residency visa and also horse accommodations. That's what sunk us in Portugal, and we needed to be very careful here. These requirements pretty much limited us to nearby Latin American countries. The problem here is escalating crime rates against foreign nationals. This left us with domestic options. The main requirements, in addition to horse boarding and riding, were socially progressive, winters that weren't too cold, and summers that weren't too hot and humid. I used online data and our previous personal experiences with different places to come up with an initial list. And some of the locations were more fanciful. Wouldn't it be fun to live there? I used online data for states and municipalities to weed out places that did not meet our major requirements. And the list dwindled to a mere handful, which received even more scrutiny. Bellingham and Annapolis were still on the list because they were major sailing hubs, but their horse boarding and riding options were limited, and so they did not make the cut. This left us with Portland or Sacramento. We had previously lived in Portland for decades and liked the city, but the horse boarding was limited and more expensive than Sacramento. Neither of us were keen on returning to cold, dreary, wet winters. This left Sacramento as the only option on our list, but we had never actually spent time there, so in March of 2023, we came down for a week and spent time looking at the different boarding and riding options as well as the city itself. The East Sac and Midtown neighborhoods looked like they would have the sort of urban amenities we wanted. And so in May, we moved the horses down, and at the end of the month, we moved ourselves down. We found a house on the border of Midtown and downtown, and after some intense fixing up and a lot of painting, we moved in. It is now mid-August, and we are finally starting to settle in. Within just a few blocks of the house, we've already found favorite places to eat, or go out for a movie, or go shopping. We have local places to ride and to hike, and over the next few months we have both local and regional trips to do more hiking and riding. Long-term, Sacramento will be our base of travel and recreation for years to come.